Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Data Standard Audio Experience. Today we have Pranav Gandhi, the head of business and strategy analytics at Signified. And today we're speaking more about analytics in the payment industry. So welcome to the show, Pranav. It's so great to have you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Catherine. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and thanks for coming onto the show. And could you just go ahead and tell us more about your background and introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, definitely. So I've been at Signified for more than a year now, close to a year and a half actually. Lead up our business and strategy analytics team. So kind of focused on strategic initiatives, but at the same time, lead our business intelligence team to make sure our data is piped correctly and stakeholders within our company have the right data to make decisions that is best for their team and for the overall goals of Signified. And so that's kind of my background here. My previous experiences have all been within kind of e-commerce and payments. And so Signified fits in really well in terms of where I am of today. So the background is I've worked at Jet.com, which later got bought by Walmart.com. Worked in a variety of roles there. Most recently there was our pricing team. So I was working on pricing and strategy analytics, which was focused on algorithms, making sure, we're priced competitive versus competitors, and also developing kind of new strategies to make sure that Walmart was priced competitively in the market and driving revenue for the company. And then before that, I was actually within MasterCard. So more of a payments role where I started my career focused on issuing banks a variety of different MasterCard services. So I've kind of played in the payments, fintech, e-commerce ecosystem. And that's a little bit about myself.
Yeah, no, that's great to hear. And where do you think the market of e-commerce is headed and why? Just because this is a huge field that has been growing throughout the past couple years, and I feel like it'll grow a lot in the future as technology really advances. So, what is your perspective on that?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think e-commerce in general is seeing huge shifts. I mean, COVID in general has changed the landscape for e-commerce right from March of last year. We saw an unprecedented number of transactions shifting towards online. And I think what's important here is just how quickly that's happened and how loyal/comfortable customers are getting. I mean, we have so many interesting data points here at Signified that we're able to look at. And what's really interesting to me is the number of new users. We saw almost like 25% increase in new users to the online channel. And then what that actually does is it actually creates like this flywheel effect, because once you have new users coming into the online channel, they then start repeating and purchasing with other merchants, which we have data on as well. And I think that new users coming in, getting used to shopping online because they had to due to COVID, and then sustaining that spend over time is what's incredible. And that's shown because, e-commerce was only projected to be about 10% to 11% of all retail in the US at least. And that's almost doubled now to closer to 20+%, which is a seismic shift. And I think, and how quickly it's happened in terms of like a year and a half is what makes the e-commerce industry super exciting. And I think the growth is going to continue because, we're seeing potential resurgence of COVID cases. Retailers themselves have set themselves up where, curbside pickup and buy online pickup in store is becoming more of a norm, where you go into the store only if you potentially are buying something you really need to see. But other items, your typical daily items, toilet paper, paper towels, those kind of things, customers are just comfortable buying them online. So I think it's super exciting in terms of where the market is headed. And also this whole notion of brands becoming more aware of how important online is and are now starting to play that game themselves is, I think, what's super interesting. So the whole direct to consumer channel and brands now potentially going to their customers directly through an e-commerce channel is going to make this space even more heated and interesting. And so, I'm super excited of where the market's heading overall.
Yeah, and you actually brought up a really interesting point to me, and it's just the thought that e-commerce it became a lot larger when, COVID hit, since everyone had to stay from home. A lot of people were ordering online. And so do you think that, let's say tomorrow the pandemic was completely over, everything was safe outside again, things are kind of getting better in the US as of right now. Do you think that e-commerce would have less consumers because more people are consuming in person and going in person into the stores? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, that's an awesome question. I think habits are an interesting thing, right? Like I think the philosophical question here is how long do you have to be doing something to then be used to doing it? And it kind of becomes second nature. So it's actually actually something we are super focused on in terms of the data that we have to see trends of whether, we already have decent percentage of the population vaccinated. People are going out more. You're seeing that with people buying more shoes, more clothing items as they're going out to more events. So we are looking at that and seeing if the spend in terms of online spend is reducing. But what we've actually seen is that in certain categories, yes, it has potentially gone down a bit. But in categories where, like I mentioned earlier, where customers have become really used to shopping online, those are actually sustaining. And that's, I think, super interesting of this whole, the habitual point where I think it's become second nature to a lot of customers. And we can also through our data kind of get a sense of the demographic. And it's really interesting that even across a broad range of age groups, this same kind of habit formation is happening, and that customers are actually, even young and old, are both transacting online comfortably where they haven't. So I think to answer your question in a sort of shorter format, I think there are certain industries, certain categories where we've seen a potential slight drop off as customers may prefer to go in store. But in other categories, there's been such a huge boom, and it's kind of sustained over time.
Yeah, no, that's great to hear from your perspective. And with the goal of enabling a friction-free buying experience for customers, how do you provide guaranteed fraud protection?
Yeah, definitely. So I think the answer here is our overall goal philosophy is to enable fearless commerce. And what we do there is we essentially want to go to retailers and say retailers should be focused on what they do best, which is growing their revenue, selling to more customers, getting more customers on board. Whereas they shouldn't be really focused on things like fraud and fraud attacks. So what our guaranteed fraud protection actually does is that any merchant, so merchant A, for example, that we go to, we basically say we can make a decision on your transactions because of this network that we have. We have thousands of merchants in our Signified network. And as a result, we're able to see all sorts of different data points, and we can identify potentially using one or two things. Even if we have just a phone number, we can map that phone number to a customer that we've potentially seen on our network before. And what we're able to do then is tell the merchant whether they should accept the transaction or decline it. And if they did go ahead and choose, if we did tell them to go ahead and accept it, we actually take on the full liability of whether or not it becomes a fraudulent transaction. So if it ends up being fraudulent and a chargeback is filed and the merchant has to pay the bank, and we had said yes as Signified to that transaction, we actually make the merchant whole. It's kind of our way of saying, we'll put our money where our mouth is, and we're confident in our models to make the right decisions, so much so that we'll actually give you the money back if we were wrong.
Yeah, super interesting to hear from your perspective there on bank fraud specifically. I'm sure that you and your organization also use Salesforce a lot. And so how does Salesforce play a part in customer data, and how does Looker play a part in the business analytics side?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we use Salesforce as our kind of customer repository. We kind of store a lot of our customer specific information in there. And then Looker, we have a really good relationship with. Looker kind of sits on top of our data warehouse and our kind of database. And Looker has been great in allowing us to deep dive into the data. We are actually doing a decent number of transformations of data in there. So different kinds of business logic that we use, we actually do it within Looker itself. And then, a variety of teams can then use Looker, which is a BI visualization platform, to make charts, to look at different tables, have automated reports being sent. And so that's kind of all really interesting work that's being done around the company that we're able to then enable different stakeholders from each team to then do that.
Yeah, no, that's awesome to hear. My final question to you has to really do with recruiting, since I'm sure from your perspective, certain talent that you're kind of looking for, certain aspects in talent that you're looking for. And so when you're recruiting, what is something that you really look for?
It's a great question. I think it's something that everyone has potentially a different answer to. My answer to who we look for in a candidate is really someone that matches up with our values as an organization. So we have a couple of different ones. Tenacity, designing for scale, agility, customer compassion. But I think when you look at a candidate overall, you will see aspects in which they excel in some of these values. And for me, I think at the end of the day, the kicker is this candidate able to not only do the job and do it well, but also be someone that is empathetic, can understand and be put into difficult situations and come out on top. And so I think there's a variety of different ways of figuring that out. But essentially someone who is resourceful, I would say, is a huge plus for me when looking at candidates. candidates because you can grow into different roles and a lot of people can change their kind of knowledge base over time. But how resourceful and willing and curious is this person to learn more, regardless of, whether that is their job or not. And in the startup, you pretty much have to wear many hats. So like the role that you're often coming in to do is not the role you end up doing like strictly that. And so that's kind of how I would say the right candidate would be.
Yeah, definitely. That's great advice for our community members at the university level. So thank you for that. And I wanted to say thank you so much, Pranav, for joining me today on the Data Standard. Where can everyone find you online to connect with you?
Yeah, I'm definitely available on LinkedIn. That would be the best place to find me.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I just want to say thank you so much, Pranav, for joining us today. It was so great to really hear your story and the things that you're working on. And it's clear that you're very passionate about the field that you're in. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks so much, Catherine, for your time as well.